The Local Government Act 2000 introduced a new political management system for local councils in England and Wales, requiring them to have a separate executive in the form of a leader or elected mayor and cabinet. To provide a counterweight for this, the Act also introduced the concept of overview and scrutiny, whereby every council with an executive management structure is required to have an overview and scrutiny committee. This provides an opportunity for councillors and members of the public to improve the quality and delivery of services by undertaking how decisions are made. It allows cross-party engagement in the process and strengthens the overall decision-making in a council. It provides an opportunity for backbench councillors to influence service delivery for the benefit of the community. In 2017, there was a review on the effectiveness of local authority overview and scrutiny committees, and these are a summary of the findings from that. These committees were created by the Local Government Act 2000 to balance the increased powers of leaders and cabinets, but their performance has varied across councils. We have found that the most significant factor in determining whether scrutiny committees are effective is the organisational culture of a particular council. Having a positive culture, where it is universally recognised that scrutiny can play a productive part in the decision-making process, is vital, and such an approach is common in all of the examples of effective scrutiny that we identified. Senior councillors from both the administration and the opposition, and senior council officers, have a responsibility to set the tone and create an environment that welcomes constructive challenge and democratic accountability. When this does not happen, and individuals seek to marginalise scrutiny, there is a risk of damaging the council's reputation and missing opportunities to use scrutiny to improve service outcomes. In extreme cases, ineffective scrutiny can contribute to severe service failures.
What opportunities for councillors does their overview and scrutiny performance present?
That's a really good question, because many people think that being on a scrutiny committee is sort of the backwater of the council, but in fact the opportunities that are available for you to influence policy and take the skills and knowledge that you have and bring that to different factors that scrutiny can look at is unending. And if you've got an inquiring mind, that's all you need to staff on a scrutiny panel and a scrutiny committee. The workbook will detail some more skills and ideas that give you the backup to do that. But actually attending, training and listening to this video and the questions and answers afterwards will give you a really sound starting point to start your scrutiny experience.
As a councillor, you have been elected by your local community because they believe you will represent them in ensuring the council provides the services they need to the standard they expect. By understanding their needs, you can bring a different perspective to the decision-making process, to that provided by the council cabinet of officers, which helps decisions to be more robust. Whether or not you are directly involved in the scrutiny function, it is important that you understand how scrutiny works and the benefits that it can bring. This video will explain what scrutiny is and how it works in practice, describe the scrutiny review process, look at who is involved in scrutiny, give an overview of useful skills for carrying out scrutiny.
What are the powers of scrutiny?
Scrutiny has the power to influence the outcome and formation of all policies that the council approves. The ability to investigate and understand what factors influence the decisions that we take. We're also able to work with partners and ask partner organisations who also make decisions and develop strategies and policies that affect our residents to come and meet Scrutiny Committee through a variety of ways in which to really drill down as to what the outcomes are that are being sought and how you can influence and again assist those outcomes so they make the best possible decisions that affect our local residents. Whilst we can't compel our partners to attend meetings, it works if we start off with a proactive and pragmatic approach to relationships. So whereas we may have partners that you feel are not serving our community to their best, rather than take what might be considered an adversarial approach, it's often best to take the approach that Scrutiny delivers, where you invite partners in and seek to explore the reason and rationale behind decisions that they are taking in order to better form those relationships with our partner agencies, where we can again influence the outcome of their policies. And taking that approach leads to much stronger relationships with those organisations.
Generally, a Scrutiny Committee has the legal power to require that the Council makes information available to it, both in the form of written reports and by officer and Cabinet member attendance at committee meetings. Require that the Cabinet responds to its recommendations within a set time frame. Scrutiny also has powers relating to certain external partners.
How can scrutiny be most effective?
Again, that's another really key question. And I think following on from my earlier response, the key to good scrutiny is being a critical friend. And that comes to the ability to look forward rather than back. So if you are having a panel inquiry day or you're exploring a policy that's been in place for 12 months, the ability to look, reflect and understand the issues that have occurred and look to how you can make that better, how to improve that process or system, is the key to good scrutiny. I've used the word adversarial before, and where scrutiny becomes adversarial, particularly with our partner agents, that can actually prevent scrutiny from being effective. So again, the key to critical and good effective scrutiny is the critical friend approach and looking forward rather than backward.
Successful scrutiny relies on the following conditions. Effective work programming. Work programming is the planning stage of scrutiny, where subjects for further investigation are identified. It is most effective when there is clear criteria for the selection of subjects and agenda items. Positive attitude of the Council's Cabinet and Council officers. Scrutiny works well when the Council's Cabinet views in a positive light and as an opportunity to improve Council performance. Scrutiny's effectiveness will be reduced if the Cabinet sees it as aggressively critical, which will lead to defensive behaviour and make it difficult for scrutiny to influence change.
What's the role of officers so far as scrutiny is concerned?
Officers have a really key role to help members deliver effective scrutiny. Our role is to ensure that you have the support in bringing information and background documents to you to ensure that you have the facts before you. At Boston, officers are really proactive in assisting members develop ideas as to whether you want to have a task and finish group, an inquiry day, or just a usual standard report going to the scrutiny hearing. And you'll find officers really supportive of your ideas that you may have.
Positive attitude of scrutiny counsellors. Scrutiny counsellors should be committed to making the function work and to developing the conditions necessary for working effectively with the Council's Cabinet and officers and any other relevant partner organisations. It is also important that scrutiny is seen as impartial and stays separate from party politics. However, scrutiny work includes looking at issues which are locally politically contentious and high profile, and as such, an element of political disagreement is inevitable. The challenge for you, as a scrutiny counsellor, is to use your political skills and understanding of the needs of local people to shape the discussions, whilst not acting in a party political manner or using the discussions to further party political objectives.
So, in a nutshell, what's the main aim of scrutiny work?
Fundamentally, scrutiny must add value, and it must add value to the processes and functions that either we deliver or our partner agencies deliver. And that can be through improved functions, procedures, policy, or just reviewing the way a service is delivered. We've got lots of examples to provide of where that value has taken place. But when you start to look at topics that you might want to consider for scrutiny, look to see how you would measure success and what that successful outcome would look like.
Good scrutiny explores and tackles issues where, through the unique perspective of elected councillors, it can add the most value. Explores and tackles issues of direct relevance to local people. Is about talking to a wide range of people, drawing them together and building consensus. Is about challenging the accepted ways of doing things and acting as a champion for developing a culture of improvement in the local area.
How does scrutiny affect local people?
Leading on from my earlier response, good scrutiny must add the value to those services and the lives that our people live in our borough. And they will be able to see the benefits of that scrutiny in their day-to-day work, living or play within the borough.
A scrutiny review is successful if it fulfills one or more of the following conditions. It meets the objectives set out by the Scrutiny Committee. Feedback from the public shows that they think there has been the service improvement they desired. The work has helped to achieve corporate or partnership priorities. There is a return on investment, demonstrating scrutiny's impact and outcomes in financial terms.
Give us some examples of successful scrutiny intervention.
Recently, we've had a project linked to an earlier scrutiny piece of work for the rural isolation. The Rural Isolation project was one from the Community and Culture Committee that wanted to understand the impact of rural isolation on our communities. They undertook a significant piece of work that came out with a series of recommendations. Once we had those recommendations as a council, we created a project team of officers within the council to explore and deliver how we could deliver the outcomes that the Scrutiny Committee had identified. Now that actually became in itself a detailed project over 2 years, which engaged completely and fully with the parish councils, but also the wider community through the parish councils. We explored a number of things that made rural isolation an issue and worked closely with the county council as well. And through that, there have been several key outcomes contained within the report to our most recent Community and Culture Committee and also to the Cabinet last month. By way of an example, things that have made a difference to the lives of those people in the communities are that we have increased social interaction from our parish councils. Previously, parish councils have been fearful, I think, of social media, but it's recognised that many generations of people in our borough use social media as a means to access information. And one of the key components of rural isolation is lack of information, particularly as to lack of what's going on within your own community. So parish councils have bitten the bullet with that and worked really well to develop their social media presence. In addition, we've looked at how we can improve the communication with our parish councils. What we found is that our parishes were receiving a scattergun approach of information, which became too much for them to be able to deal with. So now we have a monthly succinct journal that goes to them, is emailed to the clerks and the chairman, and that can then form a key number of information points that they can then discuss and use to promote within their communities. We also were mindful that outside of the parish council, there are other active social media groups and community groups. And again, many of them have access to information information and people who wouldn't normally see information posted on either the council's website or the parish council's website. and we've reached an agreement with those groups that they will publish key information that links to activities or information that's pertinent to people who may be living on their own, so that they can access it. In addition, we were also mindful of how many local newsletters there are, usually within each parish. If you live in a village, you'll probably get your village newsletter once a month. And again, that was a piece of information that we were missing. Through the project group, those officers were able to engage with the editors of those parish magazines, and now council information is contained within there as well, broadening that scope of where information is able to get to. And more importantly, the project team were able to secure their own idea as an outcome of a partnership approach called Join the Dots. This was something initiated by the County Council, and they were looking for ideas of how the wider community could be engaged. The Join the Dots forum selected the idea proposed by the Boston project team in terms of how to improve that community engagement. And at the moment, Old Leek and Fishtoft parish councils are the pilot, which will then hopefully be rolled out not just for Boston, but the whole of the county. So what does it mean to get to that stage, or a really good example of how an idea that was taken from the Culture and Community Committee, that was developed into a task and finish, and then was delivered by a project team. The key to that is good, effective work planning. So every committee that you'll go to will have your work plan as an item on your agenda. It's understanding what you want to achieve, what you want to deliver, and where the value can be released and be found and measured. And you may have something that can be delivered on a quick one-day exercise, something through a public inquiry, through an inquiry day, or you may have something that's more detailed and you want to engage with much wider agencies to get to the hub of the problem. But that, in a nutshell, effective work planning is something to take away, and really look at your agendas and look to see how you want to factor in all of the different ideas that you have, and whether those ideas are single issue, short and sharp, whether they're medium term and perhaps can be done over a 6-month period, or whether they are longer term, such as the rural isolation, which was a 2-year project to deliver those recommendations from the Task and Finish group.
Public scrutiny. The involvement of the public provides a unique perspective on how well public services are being delivered, and how they could be improved from the point of view of those receiving and using the services. Members of the public can attend scrutiny meetings and can make their views known to their local councillors and members of the Scrutiny Committee. There are also opportunities for the public to get involved in a more meaningful way in task and finish reviews. Don't forget that inviting members of the public, interest groups and representatives from other organisations can really add value to the scrutiny function in so many ways. The role of scrutiny is to achieve positive outcomes for local people by undertaking a thorough, targeted examination of the Council's service provision and procedures. However, it is not possible to examine every service in detail, so it is important for the Scrutiny Committee to prioritise and plan its workload. Some councils do this at the beginning of each year, and some do it on an ongoing basis.
Give us a real-life example.
Prosperous Boston is another really good example of effective scrutiny. That was a project that had several strands to it. And the last strand in particular was one where we engaged with the local schools in relation to the marketplace. And several of the schools sent their pupils as part of their curriculum to investigate the market, look for ideas, examine their own views and aspirations for what they thought the market should be, write reports, and then come back and present those reports to the Scrutiny Committee. It has been absolutely exceptional because the schools have been able to involve that work within their curriculum. That means they've created a bit more life and depth to their curriculum activities. Those young people that took part in that exercise and their peers that didn't, whom they reported back to in their own classrooms, were able to really understand what democracy is, they learn about the council, and hopefully, in terms of democracy, they have an aspiration to serve on this council at a future date. But in the very least, they are interested in what we do and you do as a council and councillors.
Planned scrutiny. Work programming is the process for determining which topics scrutiny will look at over the coming year, either at committee meetings or in task and finish groups. This involves evaluating a number of factors to decide which topics are to be investigated and when. The process will typically involve long listing and then short listing topics before making a final decision. Responsive scrutiny. Whether planned scrutiny takes place at the beginning of the year or on an ongoing basis, the priorities for scrutiny need to be monitored and evaluated on an ongoing basis. This makes sure scrutiny can be flexible and responsive to high priority issues or policy changes that occur throughout the year. The Scrutiny Topics selection process. Each council has its own method for selecting topics for scrutiny. In some councils there may be a very structured selection process, whilst in others it may be more informal.
What's the general process for selecting issues for scrutiny?
There's a very, very wide range of ideas and processes that you could draw on from selecting your ideas for scrutiny. These include having discussions, conversations with issues that you might be concerned about with the Cabinet, with other councillors, with council staff and with senior council staff. All of those will be willing to have a chat with you or talk through any concerns and ideas you have. There is also a number of corporate plans that we produce, such as the corporate plan, the budget, our forward plan. These are all sources of information for you that are published that you can look at and find and see if there are topics of interest or concern that you feel should be subject to a scrutiny matter. There's also the mechanism of talking to your people in your parishes and your wards. As an example, some councils like to hold surgeries and engage with their communities that way. Others like to do leaflet drops. Others like to do quick surveys. There's any number of ways that you can engage with your community to understand what is really bothering them and whether that's something that could be turned into a topic for effective scrutiny. There's also looking at our partners. Our partners produce plans, strategies and ideas. They produce proposals for something that they intend to do in a year, in 12 months, 18 months' time. Those are also documents that you can review, look at and seek to understand if there's an opportunity for the Scrutiny Committee to take a view or an approach and even invite those partner agencies to come and do a presentation on their proposals. There's also the budget. We produce a budget on an annual basis. There's always something that may be in the budget that you might say, actually that's a really good area that we would like to do an effective scrutiny exercise on. Noting how much there is to look from, I draw back to our effective work planning, and from all of that source of information that you can review and look at and get ideas, have a think about what is it you want to change and what is your outcome, and that takes you back again to effective scrutiny.
That sounds like quite a list. How do you proceed?
It is a list, and I think, as I alluded to, there's a whole host of ideas that you could draw from. I've referenced the work programme, and that is something that I do think you would need to consider. So as an example, you might take council performance and you might look at the quarterly performance reports and think, actually there's something on there that you think would be a good one to have as an inquiry day or a task and finish group or a normal report. And what you would do is raise that at your committee meeting, and there would be a list of areas then that the committee as a whole would like to review as part of scrutiny. Then you need to prioritise which ones do you want to do now, which ones can go on the work programme for 6 months' time, which ones can wait until the end of the work programme. Because you have to think about resourcing and who's going to be doing those background work, and therefore effective scrutiny means ensuring the right resources available to help deliver your outcomes. You almost also need to look at, are some of these a very quick win in scrutiny? So as an example, the quarterly performance might be just a simple report from the member of the community committee, or it might be a member of CMT to say, actually, this is the background to why that performance has dipped, or why that performance is so good. Don't forget, scrutiny doesn't just need to be about the negative, it can be about the positive as well, and understanding why something works so well, and if that can be shared out across the rest of the council as good practice. So having identified your priorities, identified your work planning, then you look at which officers are going to do that piece of work for you and work with you to deliver that. And that's all part of prioritising through your work plan good scrutiny.
Topics are suitable for scrutiny when scrutiny could have an impact and add value. The topic is of high local importance and reflects the concerns of local people. The resources are available that would be required to conduct the review in terms of manpower and budget. It avoids work duplication elsewhere. The issue is one that the committee can realistically influence. The issue is related to an area where the council or one of its partners is not performing well. The issue is relevant to all or large parts of the local area. The review would be in the council's interests. Topics are not suitable for scrutiny when the issue is already being addressed elsewhere and change is imminent. The topic would be better addressed elsewhere and will be referred there. Scrutiny involvement would have limited or no impact upon outcomes. The topic may be sub judice or prejudicial to the council's interest. The topic is too broad to make a review realistic. New legislation or guidance relating to the topic is expected within the next year. The topic area is currently subject to inspection or has recently undergone substantial change.
So, what's a scrutiny meeting look like?
A scrutiny committee meeting can look very formal. Our committee meetings are a standard horseshoe where members sit around a horseshoe. They're supported by officers and committee clerks, and then they have the public sat in theatre style in front of them. The agenda reports and packs are published 5 clear days before the date of the meeting, and you will get a copy of that report. Really, good practice is that you should read those reports because there's more than likely to be several reports on the agenda. And the purpose of the Scrutiny Committee is to go through those reports and ask questions of the officers, make additional recommendations and give observations, and possibly indicate whether you believe there will be any formal follow-up. There's also an opportunity at these meetings for members of our partner agencies to come and speak to you. If the committee is doing a piece of work where it has requested witnesses attend, then there's opportunities for members of the public and our partners in the guise of a witness to also make presentations to the committee and for you to ask questions. There's also opportunities for presentations from officers on key issues which are emerging in public policy to give you the heads up of what something might be happening within the local government area. And there's also the opportunity for members of the public to watch and come and observe the way the committee is making decisions. So, as I say, the one thing to take away, it can be very formal, but do not be daunted by that because you will be supported by your officers, and the layout and style is very easy to get to grips with as well if this is your first time of being in a committee meeting.
The Local Government Act 1972 sets out a variety of requirements around formal committee meetings. They must be in public. The public may only be excluded if it is likely that confidential or exempt information will be disclosed. The agenda and related papers must also be made public at least 5 working days before the meeting, unless the meeting is convened at shorter notice. Certain papers may be excluded from publication if they contain confidential or exempt information. The Council's constitution must have rules of procedure for overview and scrutiny committees, including provisions on public questions and the public's right to speak at the meeting, length of meetings and the use of motions to extend meetings where necessary, how witnesses will be managed, how the chair will conduct the meeting.
How can a scrutiny meeting be most effective?
There are a number of ways to make scrutiny meetings more effective. The first really comes down to good agenda planning, and I take you back to your work programme for that. A committee meeting that has too many agenda items can become rushed and can become less useful than one which only has 2 or 3 key items for discussion. A good chairman and vice chairman also help a committee be effective. Remember, scrutiny is apolitical and is not an adversarial committee. It's about exploring and understanding the evidence before you to tease out where those issues may be, where improvement can be made, and where to celebrate areas of good practice. A chairman being strict or being firm on repetition, on meandering off topic, or looking at things that aren't relevant to the topic before you makes the scrutiny committee effective. Because if you think about the timing, the longer a committee meeting goes on, the less well prepared you will be by the end of it, because you'll start to get tired, and therefore reducing the meandering keeps the committee focused. A key thing for good effective scrutiny is reading your papers beforehand. Many of you will be very, very busy in your personal lives, and suddenly the time is before you and it's committee meeting, and you may not have had a chance to read. But I'm a great believer in bite-sized chunks, and my top tip for you would be, rather than be daunted with an agenda that's got 3 items on and think you have to find the time to read all those items in one go before committee, just take 10 or 15 minutes aside here and there to just clear yourself on the agenda, then just to take yourself through the first item on the agenda and then the second item. I'd also keep a pad with you, or do it electronically if you're using your laptop, and just make some notes as you read that, because they'll be fresh in your mind then as you're reading it. And that means that when you go to committee, you've already got your questions ready that you want to ask. Another good area of effective scrutiny is, don't necessarily wait for the scrutiny committee to ask your questions. Some of the questions you may have on reading your papers could be answered by officers before you get there, and that means that will further allow you to consider the evidence before you and come up with firm recommendations or ideas that you think should be taken forward.
Having clearly defined and agreed objectives and outcomes for the meeting means that councillors can work towards a common target in their questioning, and witnesses can be fully prepared. Discussions can be easily summarised at the end of the meeting and in the minutes, with a focus on actions, post-meeting communication and follow-up work. Findings and conclusions can be more easily converted into clear, concrete recommendations at the meeting. Defining outcomes at the end of the meeting makes sure that agenda items are concluded with certainty and there are no repeat items at the next meeting. It also makes it possible to monitor progress on outcomes and commitments at the following meeting.
And what's a task and finish group look like?
Another good question, because these aren't contained in legislation, but many councils have them. They are an informal working group of the parent committee. So an example, the Community and Corporate Scrutiny Panel might convene a task and finish group. They can be drawn from all of the councillors on the council, not just the task and finish group. And they meet informally and set themselves an outcome. They break that down into bite-sized chunks and they determine what pieces of work they need to deliver by each stage of those meetings. And then a report is drawn up from their findings, and it sets out the evidence they've considered, the consultation they may have undertaken, the people they've met and taken evidence from, and it will set out a series of recommendations that then is presented as part of the parent committee, with then recommendations to the Cabinet.
The following rules of thumb have been developed by Centre for Public Scrutiny. Membership should be defined and agreed by the group's parent committee. The parent committee should also decide on who should chair. While party whips may nominate other councillors to sit on groups, the ultimate decision rests with the committee and the committee chair. As far as possible, membership should loosely reflect the political proportionality of the authority, the only caveat being that attempts are usually made to involve smaller parties where they otherwise would not be entitled to a seat. Members of the group, and even the chair, need not be drawn exclusively from the group's parent committee. Any councillor can be nominated to participate. Decision-making in the group, i.e. deciding on the wording of a final report and deciding on recommendations, should be undertaken through consensus rather than through a vote, given the fact that the membership may not directly reflect political proportionality.
And what happens once scrutiny gets going?
Well, the first thing is you look at who you want on your panel. So under the provisions of the 2000 Local Government Act, you can co-opt people onto your panel, and that's something that can be readily done. Next, although you're an informal working group as a task and finish group and not necessarily required in law to publish your meetings and minutes, good practice and transparency suggests that that's the right thing to do. So all your meetings and your notes and your minutes will be published. Thirdly, you start to look at who you want to meet and who you want to see and the level of consultation, and you start to map that out as well, and you start to invite people in. And then fourthly, you start to think about your recommendations as you go through that process. What is it you're seeking to achieve? What's that value you're seeking to add? I take you back right to the beginning of this exercise where we talked about effective scrutiny adds value to our community. And that's what you're thinking. Once you get started on a task and finish group, those are all the things that you start thinking about in terms of getting to those recommendations. And I also think there's a degree that you need to think, how is that going to play out? Is that recommendation practical, pragmatic and deliverable? Because it would be awful to develop a fantastic piece of scrutiny, but all the recommendations can't be implemented, whether because it's not our sphere of authority and function and we can only influence, or whether we haven't really costed out and thought about the outcomes of what we're seeking to deliver.
Next, we're going to look at the scrutiny review process in practice. Reviews can be carried out before or after decisions have been taken. Each council has its own process for conducting a scrutiny review, which will be influenced in part by the resources it has available. Here is a generic scrutiny review process. First, the review should be effectively scoped. Here's how the scoping might be carried out. Determine the key issues and objectives. Identify key stakeholders. Identify who needs to be involved. Decide what evidence needs to be gathered and how. Determine how the work will be managed. Consider potential risks and ways of managing them. The second step is to gather evidence. This can be done in the following ways. Undertake consultation through public meetings, surveys, workshops and focus groups. Carry out site visits. Source data and reports. Interview experts and witnesses. Conduct focus groups and workshops. Work with officers and councillors to research issues. Thirdly, the group should evaluate the evidence they have gathered. The evaluation should include considering all the evidence in the context of the scope of the project. Look at evidence alongside other sources of data to gain a comprehensive view of the performance of a given service. The fourth step is to report and make recommendations. The report should document the work carried out and what conclusions have been reached, make recommendations, be distributed to the relevant stakeholders for approval.
What happens at the end of this process?
Once the Task and Finish group has presented the report and it's been taken through the Parent Scrutiny Committee, that report will then go to Cabinet with the recommendations. And Cabinet will then make a decision as to what they want to do with those suggestions and recommendations. But one of the things that you will also want to consider is an implementation plan. How will these recommendations be taken forward? Who will deliver them? Where will they be accountable? And how will they be reported back? So as an example, I've talked about the Task and Finish for rural isolation, and I've talked about the project group being created over a 2-year period to help deliver those outcomes. Another aspect you want to consider, again as part of the adding value, is monitoring the outcome of those recommendations. Because what you'd be wanting to understand and appreciate is, have your recommendations made a difference? Have they added the value that you wanted added when you first set up that Task and Finish group? So you'll want to think about how you can monitor those, how you get feedback from either the officers or from Cabinet, or where you can understand what may have caused an obstacle to those being delivered. And because some of our scrutiny functions, we work with our partners, I've talked about how we might not be responsible for the actual function that you've scrutinised. So you want to think about how you would engage with your partner organisations to understand how they're implementing your recommendations. And you'd also want to give feedback to those consultees, to the partner agencies, all those people that took part in the stakeholder events that you'll have as part of the Task and Finish exercise. You want to ensure they feel valued at the end of that exercise and let them know how you've concluded that research that you've taken.
Pre-decision scrutiny is planned during the work programming activity and could take place immediately before a decision is made, or a more significant amount of time beforehand. Scrutiny members should review the Council's forward plan that sets out when key decisions will be taken. By challenging assumptions and assessing what risks might arise from the implementation of a decision, scrutiny provides the opportunity to influence and improve decisions before they're finalised. Councils are required to give 28 days notice of a planned decision. The majority of councils publish their planned decisions in a forward plan, often with longer than 28 days notice. So this is a useful scrutiny tool in identifying pre-decision topics. At Boston, the decisions are often brought to scrutiny as drafts of the final Cabinet report, to give scrutiny members the opportunity to influence the decision in advance of it being considered. Not every decision has to or should go to scrutiny. This would result in a heavy workload, and the committee would be unable to devote sufficient time to each item to properly scrutinise and make recommendations. Pre-decision scrutiny that is carried out immediately before a decision is made will have obvious time limitations, so it is best focused on key questions around the decision's implementation, risks and measures of success. Scrutiny carried out several months before a decision is made will have more time and resources with which to delve into the fundamentals of the decision and propose alternative options. This is the best way to scrutinise major decisions and significant strategic matters. In any council, there will occasionally be time limitations, meaning some pre-decision scrutiny might have to be carried out in a relatively short timescale.
How does pre-decision scrutiny help the decision-making process?
Pre-scrutiny is really effective at making robust decisions. It's an opportunity for that cross-party review of the policy or whatever the outcome and decision is that's going to go to Cabinet. It's an opportunity for that to be reviewed, to look at the finances, the impact on the economy, on social, on community, all those things that just having a different body of people look at may give a different perspective and highlight something that hasn't previously been considered. It means it's in the public domain earlier than just the Cabinet decision. So if there's any members of the public that may be affected or may be interested, it gives them almost advance warning that that's coming through the system, and it means that they can have an opportunity to come and look at scrutiny, watch you in action, listen to the issues, or it gives them an opportunity to see the agenda and write into the relevant officers with their concerns or with their comments that are positive. And all of that can then improve the final report that goes to Cabinet to make that a final decision really sound and robust, and to ensure it delivers the best for our communities.
And post-decision scrutiny?
There's a couple of aspects to post-decision scrutiny. The first is, once a decision's been taken by Cabinet, you might want to, again, on your work programme, plan it in so that you can review that policy or whatever the decision was 12 months after implementation to look at whether it's doing what we thought it was, whether we need to be reviewing it, or anything at all about how that policy has been implemented. The second aspect is something related to a key decision. A key decision is defined within the Constitution, and it is on the forward plan relating to the decisions that Cabinet will be taking. But after Cabinet has taken a decision which is a key decision, there is the opportunity for the call-in process to be exercised. Now, this is something when you may believe there has been a key aspect of that decision that's been taken that has either been missed or not debated sufficiently or not considered sufficiently. But it has to be something of significant importance and it's something that isn't within the report as such. And that's when you can exercise the call-in mechanism, and it comes back to the Scrutiny Committee. The decision is not implemented until such time as scrutiny have considered whether to accept the call-in and look for further debate and information, or whether they accept the decision by Cabinet was sufficient that call-in does not need to be taken forward. But that's the two aspects of post-decision scrutiny.
Next, we will talk about how an effective scrutiny review might be organised. Gathering evidence. There are several methods for using meetings to gather evidence. Scrutiny Day or Inquiry Day. This is a half-day session where scrutiny counsellors and others come together to gather evidence on a topic and to make recommendations. This is the standard approach taken by a number of councils. An example of where we have done this effectively at Boston is reviewing our persistent and vexatious customer policy. At these days, officers may be able to share confidential information that would not be able to be shared in public reports, and more open discussions can be held. This enables counsellors to better understand the subject in hand and decide whether further formal reviews may need to be carried out. Light touch review. This is a review of a narrow topic that might involve holding 2 or 3 evidence-gathering meetings over the course of about a month. Full-length review. This involves members meeting periodically over the course of several months and was the traditional approach to scrutiny reviews in many councils until quite recently. The resource involved can be significant and should be carefully considered and planned. Sources of information. The information gathered during a scrutiny review and where to find it will depend on the topic under review. In the interest of efficiency, scrutiny counsellors have a responsibility to actively seek out information for themselves, so it is important that you are aware of what information is available and how to access it. A wide range of officers will be able to assist in providing information to help scrutiny members carry out their reviews effectively. Here are some examples of information that could be useful. Information on performance, finance and risk. quarterly performance and finance reports, programme and project management information, risk registers, complaints logs, internal reviews and action plans, strategic information, budget and policy frameworks, external inspection reports, corporate peer challenge letters, reports and information, departmental plans and strategies, partnership plans and strategies, council or partnership programmes, cross-departmental strategies, improvement plans, information from benchmarking clubs where councils share information, feedback from consultations and residents' panels, from frontline staff. Using evidence effectively. Using evidence effectively means looking at it alongside other sources of data to see what themes emerge and whether different evidence sources disagree about services being provided on the ground.
Give us some examples.
Okay, you might take performance data and you might look at specifically customer complaints, spending within the department, and how that again meets specific performance targets that are found in the quarterly review. And you might triangulate those three types of information to look at how the service is performing. So as an example, the service might be coming in on budget and might be hitting all of its service targets. But if there is a sudden rise in customer complaints relating to that area, which are all upheld, you might want to drill deeper and understand, well, what's going on there? Why has there been a sudden increase in customer complaints? Equally, what if suddenly the service area is coming in well under budget, but the level of complaints has increased? Whilst that might be good news that we're meeting targets in terms of our finances, and in fact might be creating a saving, how that impacts on the service and the delivery of that service is something that you might want to explore further to ascertain the real impact of how that service is being undertaken. And those are the examples of how you take certain bits of information and start to piece them together like a giant jigsaw to get a clear picture of what's actually happening.
Making a recommendation. Recommendations are the way that scrutiny can have an impact. Making good recommendations and monitoring them makes it more likely that scrutiny's work will add value. A good recommendation is specific about the change recommended, evidence-based and realistic, focused on measurable outcomes, addressed to a specific person or group, realistic about financing requirements, developed in partnership with the Cabinet, Council officers and Council partners. There is a legal requirement for the Cabinet to respond to recommendations within 2 months of them being made. If recommendations are made to a named partner organisation, however, they do not have a duty to formally respond, although they do have a responsibility to have regard to the recommendations. The response to a recommendation from a decision maker should consist of a clear commitment to delivering the measure within the timescales set out, a commitment to be held to account on that delivery in 6 months or a year's time. Where it is not proposed that a recommendation be accepted, the provision of detailed substantive reasons why not. Scrutiny can help decision makers to view recommendations in a positive light and submit acceptable responses by agreeing beforehand when and how recommendations will be made and what an acceptable response will look like.
A recommendation has been made by scrutiny. Is that the end of it?
Absolutely not. You will have spent considerable time and effort on coming up with a series of recommendations. You want to ensure as a committee that those recommendations have got a life and actually work is being done towards delivering those. What you want to do is monitor those outcomes and those recommendations So you'll want to consider a mechanism for how you can do that. A simple way may well just be adding to your work programme a list of the recommendations that you are making each time and putting those onto your forward plan as prompting a review for in 6 months or 12 months' time. Or you may want to take a collective overall review of all of the recommendations you've done and spend a whole committee meeting looking at the recommendations and asking for reports on updates. It's entirely up to you how you want to monitor those, but the responsibility for ensuring those outcomes and the monitoring is down to you as a committee.
The effectiveness of the Scrutiny Committee relies on it establishing positive relationships with the Council's executive, its officers and partner organisations. The responsibility for scrutiny working well is shared with the Council's Cabinet, which has a duty to ensure its members do not undermine or denigrate scrutiny. The Local Government Act 2000 requires the Council's Cabinet and officers to attend meetings when required to do so. The word require is not defined in the Act, but it can be assumed that it does not confer a choice as to whether or not to attend. Provide information where required to do so. Again, this must be complied with. Respond to recommendations. With some planning and consideration, scrutiny can make it easier for the executive and officers to engage with scrutiny, therefore making it more likely that they will accept and implement recommendations. The Scrutiny Committee can do this by being clear about why topics have been chosen for scrutiny review and demonstrating, where possible, how they fit in with the executive's priorities. Making invitations to Scrutiny Committee meetings far enough in advance that people are more likely to have availability. Being clear about the purpose of committee meetings and why people are being invited to attend. Where possible, sharing scrutiny reports and recommendations in draft form. This makes sure there are no unpleasant surprises for anyone and allows the executive to highlight where it feels recommendations may require alteration for practical reasons. Defining the content and format of the executive's response to recommendations. Involving the executive and officers in discussion and dialogue as the work programme is put together. Making sure the executive's viewpoint is fully understood and reflected in scrutiny review reports.
What's the role of officers involved in these processes?
There are a number of officers involved in the process. The first is the scrutiny officer. They provide an invaluable research and role to the Scrutiny Committee because they provide your administrative support, they undertake research for you, they provide analysis of facts and information for you, and they will also pull together your draft reports based on what you want in those reports. It's important to note that Boston is a small council and that scrutiny officer function is completed by our democratic services team. So resource can be a challenge, which is why, coming back to your work programme, you may want to kickstart 5 or 6 different projects, but you need to be mindful that actually you'll only have for each committee 1 scrutiny officer able to exercise and support you in that role, and therefore it's not good to set off 2 task and finish groups as an example for 1 committee, because your officer needs to be able to service all of those tasks and finishes, produce the administration for that, the scheduling of meetings, the minutes, the notes, the actions, and following those up. But they are a really important function. You also have your lead CMT member, who the chairman will liaise with in terms of helping to organise the committee if there's any issues that need to be addressed beforehand and providing that general support. And they are, as I say, a member of CMT. And then myself, as your monitoring officer, has a role within the scrutiny process as well. My responsibility as the MO is to ensure that the council acts lawfully and doesn't exercise powers or functions for which it doesn't have legal authority or responsibility to do so. So part of the scrutiny work around when you're engaging with partners is always remembering what is our primary function, and is that something within our gift to deliver and make recommendations upon, or is that something that we can merely influence our outside agencies to do so? As a secondary point, I'm also responsible for the conduct of officers and members, and also to ensure that there's a high standard of ethics and probity within the council as well. And those are all factors that are instilled within the scrutiny function as well.
Councils often work with partner organisations to deliver services. These could be in the private, public or voluntary sectors and include contractors, organisations with whom the council has jointly commissioned services, organisations that the council funds to deliver certain services by means of grant funding or service level agreements. It is likely that any service a council delivers, and therefore any scrutiny review, will involve a partner organisation in some way. Scrutiny has statutory powers to investigate the work of a council's partners. How to engage partners in scrutiny? Early planning and dialogue to set out mutual expectations is critical for encouraging partners to engage in scrutiny. Talk to partners early on to discuss the work programme, talking about topics you're considering looking at and thinking about how they can be cast so as to better complement partners' own work. Ensure that partners know what to expect and understand the purpose of whatever meetings they are invited to and the overall purpose of the work on which you're engaged. Make sure that the scrutiny process is made transparent for partners by providing them with agendas and associated information well in advance. Use one-off inquiry sessions or scrutiny days rather than expecting partners to be able to support a detailed piece of ongoing work. Be clear about how the information provided by partners will be used.
What are the important aspects of gathering evidence?
Good listening and being able to ask questions effectively is absolutely crucial to how you gather evidence. Because if you think about all the things we've talked about, it's about engaging with third parties, whether it's your community, whether it's your officers, or whether it's third-party agencies. You'll be inviting people to come to your committee or your task and finish group, and you'll be asking them questions. And the role of a critical friend and how you conduct that level of questioning is really important. What we don't want is those partners or witnesses that come forward to provide the evidence to feel that they have been interrogated in an adversarial way. The Scrutiny Committee is not like a parliamentary select committee with those same powers of compulsion. We can't compel anybody to attend, so therefore we seek to invite and influence people to attend and encourage through persuasion. Therefore, the style and your preparation of those questions is really important. A starting point would always be a pre-meet before the task and finish meeting, or indeed the scrutiny meeting where you've got witnesses coming. And as a group, work through the questions that you want to answer. What may come out from that is a common theme, and you may have half a dozen themes where you can really pinpoint your questions. So rather than ask the same question 5 different ways, you might actually end up with 2 succinct questions that get to the nub of what you're asking. The next thing to think about is who will ask those questions. And for me, that's really important. Share those questions around so that all of the committee look involved. Some of you may be more confident than others in speaking in public, and it does come, that confidence grows if you are nervous. But as a starting point, if you have a couple of questions that you know you've got to answer, that you've got written before you and you can refer to, that's a good way to start to get over any nerves you may have in terms of asking those questions. Agree the sequence so that you know the order that you're going to ask those questions. And again, if you've pre-planned and prepared and you've developed some themes of questions that you want to ask, you then can ensure that that approach to the way the questions will be asked takes you on a nice, steady journey through the areas that you're wanting to understand more about, to identify those key issues. And finally, think about the style and way that you ask those questions. Body language is incredibly crucial at times, and the way you ask the question, the tone of your voice, the way that you look at somebody, the way you sit, can all be misrepresented or could leave a non-critical friend approach if they're asked perhaps in a way that's slightly too adversarial. And it can be difficult because you've got a committee, you're the committee, you're ready to ask those questions, you're geared up and you sit forward and you're ready to go. Again, some of those witnesses that you might be speaking with, you might have asked, they may be coming from the voluntary sector, they may not be used to being questioned in such a way. And obviously the most effective way of influencing and persuading our partners is to generate that positive relationship with them. So think about the style and way that you ask your questions.
Chairing scrutiny. The chair of a scrutiny committee should seek to provide, through strong leadership, a good environment for the constructive challenge of decision makers. They should foster discussion and encourage all concerned stakeholders to be involved in the process, whilst ensuring that all opinions are expressed in a constructive manner that contributes to the intended outcomes of the process. The chair is also responsible for ensuring that the scrutiny process, within and outside the context of formal committee meetings, is managed in a way that creates a fair and balanced environment, keeping the scrutiny process free from political point scoring and allowing for the effective scrutiny of all evidence that is produced. It is important that all levels of government are scrutinised and held accountable for the decisions they make and the impact they have on local communities. In local government, the scrutiny function ensures that decisions made by the council executive are transparent and robust and ultimately focused on improving public services. Being an effective councillor, representing the needs of your community, requires a commitment to promoting scrutiny and ensuring that it takes place. It is a tool that you can use to make sure your local community's needs are reflected in the decisions made by the council, a unique perspective afforded to you by being a councillor. Effective scrutiny involves effective work programming, planning ahead, selecting appropriate topics, allocating time and resources, scoping and planning activities. Positive relationships, fostered through effective communication with the council's executive, officers, partners and other scrutineers. Effective research and analysis, examining raw data and prepared reports, using appropriate questioning techniques and selecting appropriate witnesses. Effective meetings, preparing the meeting and the invitees, communicating in advance and afterwards, staying on topic, summarising and confirming decisions, specific recommendations, stating what needs to change, associated timescales, who needs to be involved and how it should be implemented, good monitoring and evaluation, ensuring that recommendations are being implemented and measuring success in terms of outcomes.
Scrutiny is such a key function to what we do in local government and in the council. And as I said right at the very beginning, sometimes people think scrutiny is not as exciting as the planning committee or the licensing committee, or they feel that because they're not part of the administration, their voice can't be heard. But scrutiny is that opportunity for your voice to be heard, for the ideas that you might have on how you want to make a difference to the council and the community for which you serve. And also the opportunity for you to voice those concerns of your residents. If you have ideas, if you've got solutions, or you want something looking at in a way to get a critical, positive outcome and really make a difference to the lives of our residents in Boston Borough. Scrutiny is the place for you. I hope you've enjoyed the training today, and if there's any questions arising from this session, don't hesitate to come and ask me or take through the next session. Thank you very much for listening today.